Hello everyone, and thank you for taking time out to be here this evening for another CES webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to read our Territorial Acknowledgement. Community Education Service acknowledges that the land on which we virtually gather today is the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Usually, this presentation would be in person, but given COVID, all CES sessions are now delivered via webinar. You can find many CES presentations that were recorded on the Recorded Sessions tab on our website. I will put this link in the chat box. I'm not able to say when restrictions will be lifted to allow us to give our presentations in person, but since the onset of COVID last March, we have run close to 80 webinars. We hope you have found them useful. Before I introduce our presenter, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping matters. The PowerPoint and a resource page can be found in WebEx under Event Material. If you are not able to access it, send me an email to ces@ahs.ca and I will send that to you right away. Submit questions for the presenter throughout using the chat box feature at the bottom right of your screen. If your question is not addressed, please email it to ces@ahs.ca. There will be a few pop-up polls. Please take the time to answer them. And if you experience difficulty, feel free to use the chat box to enter your responses. Finally, please welcome Danae Loud, doctoral candidate in counseling psychology at the University of Calgary and also a provisional psychologist. Danae's research interests lie in examining the relationship between adversity and resilience in adolescent populations. She is currently studying the impact of parental PTSD on military-connected youth and exploring resilience and protective factors in military families. Welcome, Danae.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Wendy, and thanks again for everyone being here. It's exciting to see that so many of you turned out. So like Wendy said, feel free to ask questions in the chat box as we go along. I'm going to try and address them kind of as we go, and I'll pause at certain points so that we can address some of those questions. But just to sort of introduce us to what we're doing today we're going to be using or going over strategies that you guys as parents or caregivers or whoever you might be relative to a child can use CBT skills to support kids in managing stress, anxiety, and mood. And those are all things that I think are particularly relevant right now with the current pandemic, but hopefully will be helpful outside of that as well. So Wendy already introduced myself to you guys, but I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Calgary, and I'm doing clinical work with primarily children and adolescents and families as well. So just to give you guys a sense of what we'll be covering today, I'm going to quickly go over what exactly cognitive behavioral is, that's CBT. How can we use CBT skills to support well-being? So that's primarily focusing on feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. And what I want to emphasize is that cognitive behavioral therapy is a modality of therapeutic intervention, but there's evidence to suggest that doing it in a self-guided fashion is also very helpful for people working from home, working with their kids, all that kind of thing. So this isn't a replacement for any kind of therapy, but it's just a way of presenting really practical skills and strategies that you guys can use at home. Then we're going to put all of those together and we're going to quickly kind of discuss what does that mean for you guys as parents in supporting your own well-being as well as your child's. So for kids versus adults, how would we change cognitive behavioral therapy? In a lot of ways, it's going to look very similar. So the primary strategies that I'm going to present today will be for children, but they can be used with your own well-being for parents as well. So the delivery, the way that you speak to yourself and the way that you include these interventions might look a little bit different, but a lot of the strategies are going to be the same, even if the delivery isn't. Okay, so just a quick poll question for you guys. As parents or other adults working with children and adolescents, I'm kind of curious what has been the hardest part over the last year, which has been really stressful for all of us. So has that been managing stress, mood, anxiety, or maybe it's been all of the above.
I'm going to have to ask everyone, please, to use the chat box. Our poll feature is not working this evening. So go ahead and enter your response in the chat box, either as 1, 2, 3, or 4. Do you see those coming in, Danae?
Yeah, and it looks like we've got, some all of the above, which makes sense.
Yeah, lots of 4s. We've got 110 people online right now, so lots of 2s, 3s, 1s, a little bit of everything.
And that makes a lot of sense, yeah. So I'm going to try and give you guys strategies that can be applicable for all of the above. CBT is a pretty general, broad approach, so it can be used for all of these things. So we're going to try and address all of them in a useful way for you guys. My next poll question is, what's been hardest for your children over the last year? So the same kind of thing, just pop in the 1, 2, 3, or 4 over the last year. And I'll give you guys a second to do that. Mood and anxiety, or stress and anxiety, 3s, 4s. Yeah, so I'd say we probably have a pretty good mix of kind of either all of the above or one of the 3. And it has been a particularly challenging year for all of us, so I'm not surprised that there's a lot of 4s coming in. All right, so what is cognitive behavioral therapy? It's, like I said, it's an extremely popular means of intervention from a psychological perspective. Lots of professionals use it to address lots of concerns. It's sort of predicated on the cognitive triad or the cognitive square, depending on how you view it. And what the cognitive triad is it basically suggests that the way we think impacts the way we feel, that impacts our behaviors, and then also our physiological responses play into that a lot. So if we're feeling anxious, we might get a stomach ache. If we're stressed, we might get a tension headache, all those kinds of physical responses to emotions. So for example of the cognitive triad, if you're running late for work, you might think to yourself, my boss is going to be so angry, I'm going to get in so much trouble. What if I get fired this time? That's likely going to make you feel anxious and stressed and worried, maybe a little bit panicky. And so then when you show up to work, the behavior you might engage in would be, well, I'm going to kind of avoid my boss so that I don't have to hear them get mad at me or get in trouble. And ultimately, that might not be productive for you. Whereas if we use CBT to kind of edit that thinking and say, I'm late for work, my boss might be annoyed, but I have a good excuse. My kid threw up this morning and I had to drop him off at the grandma's because they couldn't go to school. Then you might feel still a little bit anxious, but a little bit more confident in going to see your boss and explain kind of what's going on. And that's a little bit more productive. So that's just sort of a nutshell version of what CBT is all about. And then we kind of break down that thinking piece into smaller portions. So in terms of sort of what the main part of CBT is, it does focus a lot on that thinking and how that thinking impacts other aspects of your well-being, even though thinking, feeling, physiological responses, and behaviors are all interact with one another. There's not necessarily one starting point. So the 2 kind of ways that we separate thinking and cognitive behavioral therapy are automatic thoughts. And those are thoughts that are instantaneous, habitual. You don't always realize that they're happening, so they can be kind of non-conscious, and they're reactive to a situation. So for example, if your child gets a poor grade on a test, they might automatically think, I'm a failure, I'm stupid. They come up really quickly and they're hard to kind of address and control unless you're really paying attention to them. The other aspect is core beliefs, and those are just enduring patterns of thinking or beliefs about yourself, the world, and other people. So that might be believing that the world is a safe place, believing that people are ultimately good, or that could be believing the world is unsafe, or that people are out to get you. So those are things that really influence the way that you interpret experiences you have, you interpret situations you come across, and the way that you see yourself in the world. And these are kind of the central area of change in cognitive behavioral therapy, especially those core beliefs. So if you ever go see a therapist, or if your child goes sees a therapist to get cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of work is going to go into changing those core beliefs. What we're focusing on today, because it's primarily just skills that we're focusing on, are going to be those automatic thoughts, those things that come up really quickly and give us a really quick flash of emotion, and how you can support your children in managing those a little bit better. So like I said, the way that we interpret situations, events, or experiences, that really impacts the way that we feel or behave. So just to give you guys an example, I like this little Calvin and Hobbes comic when I'm explaining to families kind of what we mean.
Danae, sorry to interrupt there. Would you be able to make your PowerPoint a little bit larger?
I don't think so, actually. It's just the way that the slides are set up. So I'll just give you guys a little read through. So Calvin basically is saying, oh my gosh, my library book was due 2 days ago. What are they going to do to me? Interrogate me, beat me up. Oh, I'm not in the presenter screen. Sorry, that's why. Sorry, guys. So that should be easier for you guys to read. So yeah, in this situation, Calvin is really sort of catastrophizing what's going to happen to him when he returns his library book. And then his mom is able to say, you know, it's only 15 cents. It's going to be okay. So I use this example because the way that Calvin is talking to himself is creating not only emotional response, sort of panic and terror, but also you can see a little bit of the sweat coming off his head, so that physiological response as well. And then his parent is able to support him in kind of changing the way that he's thinking, so that he's feeling a little bit more calm, and he's going to be able to go return his book. And ultimately, when we're working with kids, what we want them to be able to do is to feel okay and then be able to tackle the problems that they're encountering. So what can CBT be used to treat? Well, it's used to treat a wide range of disorders. I'm not going to go into all the research that's gone into CBT, but there is a lot of evidence for its effectiveness. We do know that it is effective in managing anxiety, depression, and stress, and that's across adults, adolescents, and children. So it's a very evidence-based means of supporting mental health. And it can be effective when it's used in a self-guided fashion, like I said. So taking those skills and using them in your day-to-day life can be effective. So we're going to break things down into feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. And we're going to start with feelings, and that's typically because for parents, that's the more distressing part for you. A lot of the times when your child doesn't feel good, it's hard for you to feel good. It can also be one of the more obvious things that sort of flags if your child is not feeling well, is if they're telling you they're feeling sad or stressed or anxious. So we'll start there. So if we're going to help a child manage a feeling, we need to be able to know what that feeling is. And this comic is, I think, a really good representation. The flies are banging up against the glass trying to get at the cheese. And what this kind of shows is that no matter how much they bang up against that glass, they're not going to be able to get to the cheese. And that's because they don't know that the glass is there. So we can't help children if we don't know what the problem is. So kind of the first step when you're trying to help your kid and manage some intense emotions or mood is, what are they feeling? And that seems kind of obvious, but like I said, you can't solve a problem if you can't name it. Some kids are really forthcoming about how they're feeling. Other kids really like to clam up or have a hard time articulating it. So just start by being curious, and you can ask some of those questions like, what are you feeling right now? Asking, what are you feeling in your body? That can be a really good way of kind of pulling out some of that information from kids that are less keen to share. Just putting it on the table and saying, you seem upset right now. Can you tell me what's going on? Or you don't seem to be yourself. I've noticed you're seeming a little bit off. What's going on? So just asking directly, what's up? can kind of get you places sometimes. Now, lots of kids are going to be reluctant to tell you how they're feeling, even if you ask directly, or they're going to have a hard time articulating their feelings. That's especially true for younger kids that don't necessarily have a huge emotional vocabulary. When you're kind of a little guy, you tend to know sad and mad and happy, but that's not always helpful for parents that are trying to cool down a temper tantrum or get a kid to school if they're really upset about going to school. So there's lots of tools that can help you name a feeling. This one I would use more often with older adolescents or adults because it's fairly complicated. So they can kind of follow those core feelings in the middle and say, well, I'm feeling sad. What exactly am I feeling sad? What is that like? Am I lonely? Well, that gives you a lot of information. If a kid is isolated because we're all social distance right now, and then you can go about managing that problem. Or are they just sleepy and they didn't get enough sleep last night and that's kind of why they're feeling blue? So that'll give you a lot more information. I think in the resource sheet that you would have got as part of the the webinar, there's one that's a lot simpler and you can use that with younger kids. And I know this one has, I think, sexy on it. So you might not want to use that with your child. And the other one has, just very basic emotions. You can also Google a lot of these things. Pinterest has tons of feeling charts and Google has lots of feeling charts if you're interested in finding some. Some have smiley faces that kids really like to use, those kinds of things. But you also want to listen for clues that your kid is giving you that they're having an emotional response that doesn't necessarily sound like an emotional response. So when kids are always saying that they're really bored, a lot of the times that is they're bored. And again, I think we've all kind of been a little bit bored lately, but sometimes that's kind of an indicator that they're starting to feel blue or maybe a little lonely and isolated. So pulling out the feeling chart and say, well, bored is not really a feeling. Can you show me where on this that would be? Same with I'm tired. That can be an indicator that kids are not feeling perhaps as happy and relaxed as they could be. And things like I don't feel like doing anything. So losing interest in engaging in things that they might have been are all kind of indicators that you should do a little bit more investigating into how your child's emotional state is. So another thing that can be really helpful when you're trying to develop those skills in your children to be able to identify their emotions, because ultimately we want them to be able to articulate them for themselves and present them to you. So doing something like a body scan can help kids become aware of the sensations in their bodies that accompany certain feelings. So a ton of kids, when they're anxious, will get stomach aches. So that can be a really good indicator to parents, teachers, other caregivers that maybe this little guy is feeling anxious. Things like headaches, sweaty palms are often something kids get when they're feeling really nervous and anxious. So if you're noticing your child is getting really stressed out, kind of stopping and saying, what are you feeling in your body? Is there something happening in your stomach? Or you're feeling shaky. What kind of temperature? Are you feeling really cold or really hot? Those kinds of things. Because we know there's a link between emotions and physical sensations. This little graphic, I think, does a really good job of kind of covering every single physical sensation that could possibly accompany nervousness. But these kind of things can act as clues to help yourself identify your child's feelings, for you to identify your own feelings, because sometimes these can be sort of the first indicator that we're not feeling our best. Or like things like headaches for adults can often be an indicator that I'm kind of stressed and I'm overwhelmed, I've had a bad day at work, that kind of thing. But helping your kids know what kind of physical sensations come along with the feelings that come up for them often. And those can act as clues. You might be able to just tell that your child is trembling or they're getting rosy cheeks and ask, is this an anxious moment? Or they might eventually be able to recognize them themselves and say, well, I know I get sweaty hands when I get nervous to do a presentation, so that means I'm anxious, and here are the skills I'm going to use. In terms of physiology, it's also important to consider things like hunger, sleep, and exercise, because those all impact how we feel physically, and those impact how we feel emotionally. So just considering, is my child really super grouchy and angry today? Or have they not eaten and they need a snack? Did they sleep terribly and that's why they seem so lethargic? Have they not got enough exercise and that's why they seem agitated? So just being aware that that all plays a part in our mental health. So this is just a very basic overview of something that you can do called a body scan with your child, and that's sort of in the moment, let's investigate how you're feeling physically so that we get a better sense of what's going on for you. So you can sit comfortably, you can do this with your child, and you just kind of scan. You say, so what are you feeling in your toes? Are they relaxed? Are they clenched? Can you feel them? And then work your way up. What about your calves? How do your calves feel? And then working up for more and more. So into your stomach, are there butterflies in your stomach? Is your stomach feeling nauseous? All those kinds of things. How do you feel in your shoulders? Are they relaxed? Are they tense? And on and on. So that's something that you can find online if you Google body scan scripts. I've put one in the resource sheet as well. So there's one there. And that one I think is useful for teenagers and adults as well. So this is something that you can both do for yourself, kind of to do a check-in for how you're feeling in the moment. And it can also be used as a relaxation tool, following the script that will get sent out. For those of you with younger kids and access to Go Noodle, which I think is free, at least if you're a teacher, there are tons and tons and tons of these little body scan videos and then some accompanying sort of relaxation videos. So that's a good place to look if you're interested in having a video guide your child through it instead of having to do that yourself. Another thing you can do if you know it's a recurring problem for your child, so you know perhaps COVID worry is something that's just been coming up and up and up for you guys at home, is giving that problem a name. So that'll help you quickly recognize the emotion, help your child quickly recognize the emotion, and then you can access your coping strategies or your coping plans right away and alleviate some of the need to kind of investigate and pull out the feeling wheel to examine exactly how they're feeling. So some common examples that I use with clients would be, is the storm cloud come to visit? Is he drizzling on your head for low mood? Something like the guard dog. Is the guard dog grumpy today? Is he agitated and barking for something like anger, frustration, overwhelm? One that I like to use a lot is the worry bug. So is the worry bug come to visit and what is he telling you? So that's something that can be a much quicker way of accessing emotions when you know it's something that comes up a lot for your child. And there are ways to do this that are a little bit more teenager friendly. Again, the guard dog is a good one for a teenager. And a lot of this stuff is used with adults too. So people will describe their depression as like a big black dog that's following them around. So this isn't just for kids. This is something you can do for yourself. And sometimes giving a problem a name like that sort of gives you some distance. And so then it doesn't seem so hard to manage. So, my big black dog is visiting, so I know, I need to go take some rest. I need some time to myself, and that's going to make him go back into the forest or wherever he might go. So, if we're going to work through sort of this example of the worry bug. So let's say you and your child decide that when they get anxious, we're going to call it the worry bug, and we know the worry bug comes to visit. So when does the worry bug come to visit? Is he going to show up just randomly? Because that might be the case. Do we know he always shows up right before you have to go into the school building and he makes you feel a little bit stressed? Or maybe he shows up when you have to go to the doctor. So getting a good sense of those times when the worry bug, we know he visits, and your kid can start kind of prepping themselves and say, okay, well, I know that this situation makes me nervous. So what do I need to do to manage that on my own? Now, to kind of start accessing that thinking part of things, you can start saying to your kid, what does your worry bug say to you when he comes to visit? Is he telling you, school is scary because there's people there I don't know and I get nervous? Or what if people don't like you? Or what if you do bad on the test today? So start cueing your kid to start thinking about what they're thinking. And we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail in a little bit. When he's here, what do you feel in your body? Does the worry bug sit in your stomach? Does he give you butterflies? Does he make you feel sick? Does he give you a headache? All those kinds of things. And like I said, adults can use this strategy too. You might call it the worry bug. That might be something that really fits, or you might find a different, maybe more adult name for that problem. So before we move on to the thinking part, that's kind of the bulk of where we're going to hang out for the next little bit. Does anyone have any questions that they want to add to the chat box that I can address before we move on?
There's a few people who have said that they have emailed me to get the handouts, but I've only sent about 10 handouts right now, and there's 130 people watching. So Charlene, could you just make sure that it's ces@ahs.ca? Otherwise, there might be a problem with the AHS server and they're not coming through.
Okay, so it seems like people are good for questions for now. Again, I'm going to try and answer them throughout as they come up. So we'll move on to thinking. So this is just another graphic that kind of gives you a little bit more of an in-depth look at the cognitive triad. So thoughts, behaviors, and emotions being kind of the big ones, but also being aware that those physical sensations impact how we think and feel and behave, and also things like environment and family. So it's pretty normal for, if parents are stressed, that stress can kind of trickle down to children, and that's normal and expected. But also, is it a really stressful school environment for a lot of kids right now? I think so. So that might be, making things a little bit worse. That's also true if you take a kid out of a stressful environment. So, are all their siblings roughhousing in the living room and you see them getting a little bit overwhelmed, maybe they need to be removed, and that can make their emotions a little bit easier to manage. So thinking might seem like the easiest thing to change, because it seems the most straightforward, but it takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of kind of effort. So we're going to talk about editing children's thinking. So making little tweaks to it that might make them feel a little bit better, help them engage in problem solving, just feel kind of their best. But it's important to remember automatic thoughts happen really, really quickly. We're used to doing sort of those similar automatic thoughts or things that we do over and over and over in our head for potentially our whole lives. So undoing them can take some practice and take some time. So be patient with yourself if you're working on this yourself. Be patient with yourself if you're trying to help your child, and then be patient with your child, because it's kind of like you're walking in a field with long grass. And if you've taken the same route through that field of grass, it's going to be sort of flattened out, and it's going to take a while for that to grow back if you're taking a different route. So, thinking about thinking. The purpose of editing our thoughts is to get a more realistic, constructive, or balanced view on a certain situation or experience. So a lot of people kind of misinterpret this as, changing it to positive thinking. So if you're feeling anxious, thinking, well, I should be happy, that's not what CBT is about. It's making it a more realistic analysis of what's going on, helping you manage problems constructively, or maybe being a little bit more balanced. I think a really, really common one is, a lot of kids who have perfectionistic tendencies will see any sort of slight mistake as a huge failure. So transitioning that to a more balanced view of saying, this was one mistake, how can I learn from this? This isn't the end of the world. That would be a more constructive way of looking at it. So for those of you that have younger children, you're going to need to do a little bit extra work on your children's metacognitive skills. Metacognitive skills are basically your ability to think about your thinking. So if I'm stuck in a traffic jam and I'm super frustrated and I just want to get to where I'm going, then I have the metacognitive skills to say, what am I saying to myself right now? Am I saying, this is so stupid, I hate being stuck in traffic, nobody can drive? So that's what metacognition is. It's thinking about, what am I saying to myself right now? That ability is just starting to develop in younger children. Teenagers get a lot better at it, but they're still working on that too. And really that wouldn't fully develop until you're kind of 25. So we're going to talk a little bit about strategies for how to get younger kids and maybe younger adolescents to engage in those metacognitive skills in a really practical, concrete way that's going to be a little bit easier for them. If you're an adult, it might be challenging as well, because some of us are really busy and distracted and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about our thoughts. So I'll give you guys some just sort of quick strategies to go through. But first, before you start engaging in any kind of thought editing, any kind of changing to thinking, you want to think, does this situation require some problem solving? So before we get into reevaluating what's going on and changing the way that your kid is thinking about a certain thing, are there some certain steps that need to be taken here? So for example, if your child fails a math test, then there's some problem solving that needs to happen. So do they need to go talk to their teacher? Do they need to think about studying more next time? Is there some school support that they need to go get access to? So always considering, is there problem solving that needs to happen? Sometimes editing or thinking is going to make it a little easier to engage in that problem solving, but kind of as the adults, you're going to want to think about that as well. Sometimes it's just not a good situation, and engaging in that thought editing isn't necessarily useful. So a situation like that would be, someone's pet just died, and that's just going to be a sad situation no matter what. We don't really need to work on editing. We need to give that soothing and comfort, and snuggle up with mom and dad and watch TV or eat your favorite dinner, that kind of thing. Now, where we get into the thought editing is, are they falling into a thinking trap? And thinking traps are sort of common thinking errors or ways of thinking that kind of make people feel worse instead of better. They can be unrealistic, they can be overly negative. And we're going to go through a good list of those here in a second. And just to reiterate, this isn't, like I said, it isn't just positive thinking. We're not trying to just put a positive spin on a bad situation, or say, never feel anxious, never feel stressed, never feel sad. It's normal to feel all those things. What we want to be able to help kids do is to get through those as well as they possibly can, to manage those feelings and kind of move on and feel okay after the fact. So these are the common thinking traps. Once everyone gets the PDF that gets sent out, or the document, you'll be able to see a big list of these, and these are common amongst children, adolescents, and adults. So again, for those of you that are hoping to use these strategies for yourself, they're things that are applicable to all ages. So black and white thinking is something that you're going to see really commonly in younger children. So it's either good or it's bad. So a common one, again, is anything under 100% is a failure. So that would be something common for kids that are, more on the perfectionistic end of things. I got in a fight with my friend and I'm never going to be friends with them again because they're a terrible person. So for the younger kids, you're going to see this a little bit more often, just because younger kids tend to be a little bit more rigid in their thinking. But this can be, adults think like this sometimes, teenagers think like this. It's pretty common. Catastrophizing is another one. So if I go to this party, I'm going to embarrass myself, I'm going to do something stupid, and then I'm going to lose all of my friends. So you're basically predicting the worst possible outcome. And I think, again, we're in the middle of kind of a crisis, and so it would be, saying that COVID will never, ever end. This is going to be terrible for the rest of our lives. That's kind of an example of catastrophizing. Negative filter. So that is ignoring the good and focusing on the bad. So, again, a COVID example would be focusing on the allergic reactions to the COVID vaccine and saying, oh my gosh, that's like only bad news is coming out, even though we have a lot of good news coming in about progress that we're making. A lot of teenagers especially will say, I don't like my nose and there's nothing about me that's attractive, or I got one point off in my presentation and everyone thought the presentation was stupid. So you're just filtering out all the good news and focusing on the one bad thing that might happen. Fortune telling, a teenager has a bad breakup. I know I'm never going to get a boyfriend again. So looking into the future and making predictions that are not necessarily realistic or based on fact. overgeneralizing. So, maybe, you have to discipline your child for doing something that they shouldn't have done at school, or not getting a grade that you wanted them to get, or doing something rude to their sibling. And then if the child says, I did this one bad thing, I'm such a screw up, I'm a bad kid. So taking one bad experience and making it global. It's something about me, or it's something about the world. And then mind reading. This one, again, I think is really common in adults as well. So kind of predicting what other people's reactions are so even for me, when I had the presentation on the wrong screen, thinking to myself, well, everyone in this presentation is going to think I'm bad at presenting, even though, nobody has said that to me yet. So these are kind of the common ones. Once you all get the PDF, it'll be a really nice guide. You can use this or pull it out with your teenager or with yourself, and we'll talk about using that to kind of identify what's going on. It's also something that's really easily Google. You can find it on Google. There's a website called Anxiety Canada that has a lot of these resources as well, if you're interested in kind of looking them up for yourself. So how would we go about actually editing the thought? So we'll use the example of, say Jamie got a bad grade on her math test. She really bombed it. It didn't go well. So, she might think to herself, I'm stupid. I'm never going to do well in math ever again. And, therefore, I won't be able to go to university. So that kind of thinking might result in a lot of anxiety, maybe some sadness or frustration. In any event, it's not going to make her feel good. So you want to help Jamie or your own child kind of think about, what thinking traps are you falling into? So is I'm stupid, is that an overgeneralization? Is saying I'm going to never do well in math again? Maybe that's a little bit of fortune telling. And saying, I'm never going to get into university now. That might be fortune telling and catastrophizing, all those kinds of things. So really making it tangible and right there for your kid. And then once they become a little bit more familiar with what those thinking traps are, they might be able to actually identify them for themselves. But framing them as, this is a trap, this is something that's making you not feel good, and it's not going to help you the next time. So a way of sort of, we identify the trap, and then we want to adjust that thinking. So if she gets a bad grade on her math test, you're not going to feel good about that, but saying to yourself, this is just one test, I'm going to try and do better next time. And then kind of coaching kids to engage in the problem solving that might need to happen. So do you need to go talk to your teacher? Do you need a little bit of extra help? How can we support you in doing that? And again, we're not going to make her feel great about getting a bad grade on her math test, but we're not going to make her feel awful either if we can adjust that thinking a little bit. So she might be a little bit disappointed, but being a little bit disappointed is better than being panicky or sad or anxious. And if we're not feeling so intense and negative, that's going to help us go solve the problem that we need to do. Anxiety, sadness, frustration, that's all very overwhelming. That makes the problem seem sort of insurmountable. But if we sort of lessen that down to disappointment, then we can start making our way through that problem. So helping kids that are a little bit younger with thinking traps might be a little bit of a challenge. So we're kind of going to revisit that renaming the problem. So, what is your worry bug saying to you? That's a really good way of getting kids to express the thoughts happening in your head. So if you have a kid that's, engaging in school avoidance, they don't want to go to school, and we've identified that the worry bug comes to visit when they have to go to school and gives them a stomach ache, so then they don't want to go. Well, what's the worry bug saying to you? Well, I'm new here and nobody's going to like me, or I don't like my teacher makes me feel bad. Those are probably things that they're saying to themselves, but they're sort of articulating them in a more accessible way, rather than if you ask an 8-year-old kind of, what are you thinking right now? You might have a little bit more of a challenge. And you can kind of flesh out your little naming of the problem. Well, let's draw the worry bug. What does he look like? And again, figuring out when he visits, how can you tell that he's here? How do you feel when he comes to visit in your body and then emotionally as well? Another really practical way is just breaking things into red thoughts and green thoughts. And this is something that is useful for younger kids. for teenagers and even for adults. So red thoughts are thoughts that are unhelpful. They can be really self-critical, but ultimately they just function to make you feel worse. So, things that are going to make you feel anxious in a situation where you might just be a little bit uneasy, things that really make you feel like a failure when really it was just a little mistake. Whereas green thoughts are constructive, they're helpful, and they make you feel better. So again, it's not just a positive thought, it's a thought that's constructive. So just to give you guys some examples, red thoughts would be things like, I got a bad grade on my math test, so I'm stupid. Or, the pandemic is going to last forever. My life is ruined because I got in a fight with my friend and no one at school is going to like me. Those are all things that we say to ourselves that might just come up really quick, but they're not going to make us feel better. Whereas a green thought would be, this is only one test and I'm good at a lot of things. So it's not saying, well, it's okay that I did bad, saying, well, this is a one-off and what can I do next time? And look at all these other things that I'm good at. Maybe I'm not good at writing English essays, but I'm great at quadratic equations, or I'm great at algebra, or I'm great at basketball. There's all kinds of things. The pandemic won't last forever. There's good things happening in other scenarios in the world. Maybe you need to go look at cat videos on YouTube, or videos of elephants or something that's going to remind you of the good that's happening in the world. And one bad thing doesn't make me a bad person. So having one fight with my friend doesn't mean I'm never going to have friends again. Maybe I need to go apologize to my friend, or maybe I just need to let it blow over. So keeping them realistic, pretty grounded in something accurate, but not so negative. So another way of doing things would be breaking it down into your inner coach or your inner critic. So your inner coach is supportive. So helping kids develop kind of that self-talk that boosts them, that bolsters them, that kind of supports their self-esteem. The inner critic is helpful. They're realistic and they get the job done. So that's where things like problem solving really come into play with your inner coach. So externalizing it in this kind of way where it's not you having to say something positive to yourself, it's your inner coach. What would a coach say to me? They would say, we need to practice and try better next time. If you were a soccer goalie and you kept letting in the balls, then your coach wouldn't tell you you're a terrible soccer player. Your coach would say, okay, this is what we need to practice. We're going to get better at this next time. So they're supportive and realistic and helpful, and they help you engage in that problem solving. And kind of the key here is that they're realistic. So your inner coach doesn't sort of wander around and tell you that you're fantastic and you're phenomenal and you never need to change. For a couple reasons, that's not very helpful. There's usually things that kids need to change and work on. That's part of being a kid and part of being an adult. And also it's really hard to believe. If you're someone that's sort of prone to being critical, it's not going to be easy for you to just start telling yourself that you're perfect and phenomenal just overnight. And sort of opposing that to your inner critic. So the inner critic isn't helpful. They don't help you get things done. They're overly critical, overly negative. They're unrealistic. So they kind of fit in with all those thinking traps that we talked about earlier. And ultimately, they don't help you accomplish your goals. So when you're working with kids, you want to frame it as, okay, so I know your inner critic is saying to you, you're stupid because you didn't do well on this math test. What would your inner coach say to you right now? Would they be saying the same thing? Or, helping kids even identifying with your own. So you might say, when I have a bad day at work, my inner critic says to me, you're no good at your job. So then I have to call in my inner coach and he gives me a nice pep talk. And this is what I say in my pep talk. This is one bad day. I need to take a weekend off to kind of refresh. Maybe I need to go talk to my friends, those kinds of things. And what I like to do when I'm working with kids and teens is I kind of frame it as, how can you give yourself a pep talk? What kind of thing, if you were giving a pep talk to another kid and really psyching them up to go get something done, what kinds of things would you say to them? And can you do that to yourself? Can your inner coach give you a self-talk or a pep talk like that? And again, with your little kids, they might enjoy drawing this out because kids just sort of tend to get something out of drawing it out and making it more tangible than it would be if it's just thinking inner coach and inner critic. So when you're supporting kids in editing thoughts, there's some questions that you can ask that are sort of routine to help them reframe what's going on. So, with an older kid, what's another way to look at this situation? So you've gotten in a fight with your friend. It was a really bad fight and you're worried that you're not going to be friends anymore. Is there another way of looking at this? Can we see, maybe this fight happened for a reason and that wasn't a very good friend, and losing them might not be the worst thing. Is this the end of the world? Do I need to go apologize again? Is there a way of solving this problem? A really good one to use for your kids and for yourself is, would I say these things to my friend? Would I be this harsh with my friend? Would I be this critical with my friend? Or would I say something else? If my friend was coming and telling me that, they're not lovable because they had a breakup with a boyfriend, would I say, yeah, you're doomed, your romantic life is over? Or would I say, that was just one relationship, I didn't like that guy anyway, that kind of thing. Another one that you can kind of really expand on, and we'll kind of talk about this in a bit, would be, let's gather some evidence here. So this is something that you can even write out with your children. This is really important for adults kind of to engage in as well when they're working on their own mental health. But what are some evidence for these facts and then against these facts? So if the thinking trap is, I'm a total embarrassment at school because I gave a presentation and I was so nervous and I shook all the way through it and it went terribly. And so, everyone thinks I'm totally embarrassing. What are the evidence for that fact? Has anyone told you that? Have people stopped talking to you? Is any of that true? Well, then what's evidence against that fact? People didn't say anything against me. My friend told me I did a good job, I'll do better next time, that kind of thing. I still had friends sitting with me at the lunch table, and I got a decent grade. So kind of evaluating, how realistic is this thing that I'm telling myself? And then with younger kids, again, helping, is this the worry bug talking to you? Is this something true, or is this the worry bug kind of sneaking in and trying to make you feel bad and worried? And then, framing it, like I said, as is this a red thought, green thought? What would your inner coach say to you right now? So all those things that kind of help kids think about and then change the way that they're speaking to themselves inside their heads. So just a note on thinking, kids tend to internalize how their parents think about things because as parents, you're kind of the guiding light for children. You're responsible for raising them and kind of teaching them about the world. So just being mindful that if you are saying some of those thinking traps out loud, then kids might kind of internalize that as well. Sometimes people sort of unknowingly say them to their children without any bad intention. But just being cautious that, kids tend to be pretty good at picking up on what we say to them. So being cautious about how you use language in front of them. Are your own thinking traps kind of coming out in how you speak about yourself or how you speak about situations? And being, trying to keep that kind of either inside or edit them yourself. This might also be a really good opportunity to teach your child. So if you find yourself saying in front of your kid, oh, I'm such a screw up because, I don't know, you made a mistake in the kitchen, then that might be a good opportunity to say, oh, look, I said a thinking trap and that was this one. What could mommy say better next time? Or what could dad say better that would make him feel a little bit better than what I just said? So modeling that, thinking and feeling a little bit better to your kids. So one thing that I would be really clear about is when you're doing thought editing, you're going to need to use empathy sort of as your starting point. So that's saying, you're feeling anxious right now. That's too bad. I want to help you feel better. It's always crummy to feel anxious. You're going to want to provide that empathy first, because especially for teenagers, if you have a teenager blow in and they're super angry, they don't want mom and dad to jump on it and start problem solving right away. They want the space to be like, I'm angry. I want you to hear and understand that I'm angry. So you're going to get a lot farther in helping your child edit their thoughts if you start from that place of empathy and kind of settle things down and make your kid feel like they're heard. Because kind of, the risk when we're doing this thought editing with our children is that they're going to feel like, we're kind of over involved, we're over problem solving for them, and that can be frustrating sometimes. And then that's going to probably make things a little bit more frustrating for you. I think anyone with a teenager has probably been in a situation where they're trying to help out and they get their head ripped off a little bit for jumping in and trying to fix things before a teenager really feels like they're being heard. So everything kind of presented with a layer of empathy, acknowledging that feeling sort of to start off with. So we're going to move on to behaviors. And again, I think this is one of the more observable aspects and can be a little bit difficult for parents. A lot of kids, their behavior is tantruming, their behavior might be refusing to go to school, all those kinds of things that are a little bit difficult for parents to manage. I would just say that this isn't necessarily like a behavior modification workshop. So we're kind of saying that thoughts are where behaviors would flow from. So I'm not going to give you guys any behavioral interventions, but we're going to talk about how behavior fits into these strategies. So, often, again, like I said, behaviors are pretty noticeable for parents, but some behaviors are also internal. So, things like withdrawing, not calling friends as much as they used to, not playing sports or going on bike rides as much as they used to. Those are a little bit more passive, but those are also behaviors that might be associated with certain feelings. So just being cautious that not everything is going to be sort of an active behavior. It might be a withdrawal as well. And changing our behaviors can also change our emotions. So we're going to talk about that first. So just sort of general rules of thumb. The more you avoid something that makes you anxious, the more you increase anxiety. So an example of that would be if you have a teenager that has social anxiety and therefore they avoid interacting with other kids, that's going to sort of teach them to avoid it more because A, avoidance alleviates the anxiety, and B, they're not developing the skills to kind of power through that anxiety, show themselves that they're able to manage social situations, and able to cope with that anxiety as it comes up, and then have the successes that might come from interacting with other children. So essentially, when you avoid something that makes you anxious, you're undermining your own sort of self-confidence in being able to handle problems, and you don't have those successes. And then on the other end of things, with things like low mood, the less you do, the less you feel like doing. So of course, when anyone is feeling sort of sad or blue, they're going to want to sort of, chill out, maybe want to watch TV for a couple hours, take a nap and rest, and that's okay. But when that becomes, I'm going to watch 8 hours of TV, I'm going to nap for hours at a time, that is going to start to make us feel more lethargic and more sapped of energy. And the less we do, that's going to make us feel like doing even less, and that is not helpful for our mood. We also know that getting active is a really good way of managing mood. So there's a concept called behavioral activation that's been really well researched. And we know that just getting up and doing things gives us a little bit of a boost in our mood, even if it's really challenging. So if you have someone with a really low mood, they're not going to feel like doing a lot. So this might be a little bit of a challenge if you have a teenager with a really low mood, getting them to do something. But once you do, you might see a good improvement in mood. And that's especially important right now because we all have less access to things that we might have done. If you went to the gym regularly, that's obviously been a challenge. If you were a person that went and did a social club, or when sports were shut down for kids, there's been a lot of limitations and sort of those physical active things that we can do. So sort of brainstorming ways that you can get that activity in for your kids and for yourself, sort of while keeping safe, of course. So sort of the concept behind behavioral activation is that you're re-engaging in sources of positive reinforcement, you're reducing that avoidance that might make you more avoidant, and then you're helping yourself set goals. So, if you're want to go out and get a run and you go out and do it, then you kind of get that self-esteem boost and like, hey, I went out and I actually did that run and it felt good. Or, you know, my goal was to be able to run a 5K and at least I've made a step forward in doing that. And then of course, that doesn't have to be exercise. That could be, you know, I wanted to go bake a cake today, so I'm just going to get up and I'm going to make myself do it. Or I wanted to take the dog for a walk by myself. I wanted to practice the piano. It doesn't have to be exercise. We do know that the impact of exercise on mood is well documented. So, you know, that could be going for a walk with the dog, going for a walk with mom, you know, doing 10 jumping jacks, but that sort of that boost that people get from exercise is pretty well documented. So, again, when we're managing and modifying behaviors, what's a good sort of concrete strategy to do is to create a coping plan. So that's written out steps that yourself and your child can follow. So we're going to take all of this and kind of put it together to help modify those behaviors as well. So an example, just a really brief example. So identifying the problem. So you might know it's the worry bug, or it might be a new problem. Like I'm just feeling really stressed about school and I'm super overwhelmed right now. Okay, so then let's write out, what are you feeling in your body? Well, I know that I'm stressed about school, I'm overwhelmed, my shoulders are tense, I have a stomach ache and I have a headache. That's what I'm feeling. What emotion are you feeling? Okay, well, it's stress and it's overwhelm. What are you thinking? Well, I'm saying I have so much work to do and I don't know how I'm going to get it done, and I can't get time to ask my teacher questions because everyone's asking questions, all those kinds of things. And then you're going to want to edit the thinking. So that goes back to those thinking traps. So first identify what are the thinking traps happening. So, you know, I have so much work to do, I'm never going to be able to get it all done. Well, what kind of thinking trap might that be? You know, I'm never going to get it done. Maybe that's catastrophizing, those kinds of things. And then pursuant to that would be, you know, is there some problem solving that needs to happen? Do you need to take some extra time to do some work? Or when are things really due? Can you ask for an extension? All those kind of things. And then just having sort of a written out strategies that, you know, when I'm feeling stressed, doing this makes me feel better. So when I'm feeling stressed, if I go and hug my dog, it gives me a little bit of a boost in the moment and I'm ready to go back. So engaging in those kind of coping behaviors, those little coping skills that are going to help give you a little bit of a boost in your mood and enable you to kind of get back to it as a little nice sort of add-on cherry on top of the pie to the editing and thinking. What I like to have a lot of families do is create a list of soothing and coping strategies that go with every emotion that might be negative or common for you guys right now. And then you can present those to your kid kind of in the moment as a way of feeling better. And this is going to be something that you guys create as a family. So you might create your coping list, and dad would create his coping list, and brother would create his coping list. And it can be kind of a nice family activity. Again, we're under a lot of stress right now, so this might be a good way of having a family conversation about how we're managing stress as a family. Everybody has to use coping skills. What can we do to support each other? Can you brainstorm? So can your kid think of some good coping strategies that you might be able to engage in? They might have some good ideas. And that kind of boosts their self-esteem as well, as including them in that conversation about family well-being. So this is just some nice examples that I like to use just to give you guys a sense of what I mean. So, you know, if you're anxious, going for a run makes me feel better. Do I need to FaceTime my friend? Do I need to make a plan for how to deal with the problem that's coming up to me? Maybe I just need to take a shower, guided imagery. Again, stress and sadness, all the same kinds of things. So, you know, getting a hug from dad makes me feel better. I want to FaceTime with my grandma. Snuggling my pet, maybe I need to take a nap, all those kinds of things. So essentially what this does is it makes it easier for your child to kind of quickly be able to pick something that's going to make them feel better. And it takes a lot of that effort off of you guys if you have this list handy, sort of maybe it's on the fridge, maybe it's in a drawer and you know how to pull it out, so that you can say, okay, you know, we've identified the feeling is anxious. So first thing first, what are we going to do to feel better? And including that thought editing. An idea too would be to have the coping strategies and the thinking traps all in one document. So your kid can say, yeah, it's the worry bug. This is the thinking trap he's trying to get me into, or this is the red thought he's saying to me. And so I need to go and give my dog a pet and think about things. So what about parents? Just as a poll question, I'm kind of curious, do these seem like strategies that you guys could use as parents or caregivers kind of to support your own well-being if you're comfortable putting it in the chat? Just a one or a two.
Krista, can I get you to put your email address in the chat box, and I can get you the handout? I've been manually sending everybody the handouts. I apologize that there's a delay in your receiving them. You just must be doing some type of an update.
And yeah, like I said, a lot of this can be found at Anxiety, sort of, I think, Anxiety Canada, too, if you're interested in kind of looking for some resources.
They'll get them. They'll get them.
Okay. Yeah.
They'll definitely get them.
Okay, well, I'm happy to see that we've got mostly ones coming in, it seems like. So like I said, it's really usable sort of across age groups. And in fact, it's probably a lot easier for you guys as adults to do for yourself than it would be for little guys that are still developing their metacognitive skills and learning how to think about things. I'm going to quickly talk about maybe a little bit more adult focused stuff, and then we'll take some time for questions and things. So like I said, we can use the same strategies for managing parent stress, managing your own low mood and anxiety. Oh, and I did have a question come in. So, curious about how much coping plans would vary between different emotions, or would they be widely similar? So that's kind of an interesting, or something that you would decide based on your own child. So I have seen coping plans where it's just a big list of things that might make you feel better, and it doesn't need to be sorted out by emotion. Some kids want different things. So I think a lot of teenagers that get very anxious might want something that kind of burns off that anxiety. So going for a run, you might not go for a run if you're feeling really low. But it's kind of up to you guys. They can all be in one. They can be separated by emotion. All those kinds of things. And like I said, one thing that I think is really useful for parents to think about is when you're talking to yourself, thinking about, would I be saying this to my kid? I'm saying this to myself. I'm saying, I have to homeschool my kid right now and do my online work, and I'm just a total failure at everything. If your kid was coming to you with a similar kind of stress, is that something you would say to them? Or is that sort of a uniquely harsh thing that we'd only say to ourselves? And that can be kind of a good cue to notice, okay, so I definitely wouldn't say that to my kid, so am I falling into my own thinking trap? Because we are really delicate and loving and compassionate about our own children, and it can be hard, especially right now, to give ourselves kind of that same grace. And like I said, it takes a lot of practice. It's going to take practice for you guys if you're using these skills yourself, and it's going to take practice for your children. We know that the brain is sort of a plastic thing, and thoughts travel along highways. And if it's something that you've been saying to yourself for years and years and years, you're going to kind of have to reroute that pathway, and that's going to take a little time for the construction to get finished and for you to be able to, instead of that automatic thought being something like I'm a failure or this is a catastrophe, to being like, okay, this was one mistake. And it takes some effort. It might take effort always to be able to kind of reframe things in a way that's a little bit more balanced and positive. So this would be just sort of an example of a little bit more of a sophisticated, I guess, editing process for yourself as an adult. For older teens, I would imagine some of you have probably university age kids at home as well. So something for, 19, 20-year-olds. So first thinking about, what is this red thought? When you're working with adults, you don't call them red thoughts, you actually call them hot thoughts, because they're things that just pop up and make us have a strong reaction in the moment. So what is this red or this hot thought? What's the evidence for it here? Is this realistic? Is there evidence if you're worried about getting fired from your job? Has my boss gotten me in trouble lately? Have I, gotten bad feedback, all that kind of thing? Is there evidence for this actual thought? Then what's my evidence against this thought? Well, I just got a good job review. Things sort of seem to be pretty business as usual. I just had a nice coffee with my boss the other day, that kind of thing. And then generating those alternative thoughts for yourself, saying, okay, so this seems like this red thought is this kind of thinking trap. What's a different way of looking at this? How might I talk to a friend if I was helping them out? How might I help my child out with this? If I was talking to my own parents or my grandma, what would I help them say? So taking sort of that outsider view of the way that you're thinking to yourself, and then coming up with more constructive ways of looking at that. And again, just to reiterate, not saying that you can just turn a bad situation into positive thinking. You just want to make it a little bit more realistic, kind of easing the pain for yourself if it's a bad situation. Again, there's bad things that are going to happen. If you get laid off, for example, you're going to have a lot of hot thoughts, negative thoughts about that. But thinking about it in a way that's going to help you kind of get up the next day and move on with things. What I also kind of want to emphasize too is it's okay to take time to just sort of sit with the feeling. Before you jump into all this kind of thinking and editing. It's okay to say, I'm feeling really blue today. I'm just like so sick of working from home. I just need to kind of crash for a couple hours. That's okay too. We don't want to say that you're never supposed to feel anxious or sad or really stressed out. Sometimes it's okay to just sit with that feeling before you jump into this really active thought editing kind of process, because this stuff does take a lot of effort. You have to be paying attention pretty well. So that's kind of all my slides. I hope I didn't go through things too fast. Were there any kind of questions that I can answer for people here?
Did you see that question earlier? I'm just going through the chat looking for it. Just 1 second. And again, everybody, sorry about the handouts, but I will be sending them all again tomorrow to everybody, so you may be receiving them 2 or 3 times. Where is that question? Chat's going on. Yes, the session is being recorded, so we will be sending that link out as well once some editing has been done. And you can watch it again or share it with people you think should be watching it. Can teens apply metacognitive skills to their fluctuating emotions during puberty?
They can. So you're sort of starting to develop your metacognitive skills. So it's a fairly sophisticated process. But again, CBT is useful with teenagers. So getting them to think about their feelings again, if it's a little bit more of an intense sort of mood fluctuating situation, then that's when I would really emphasize using empathy. So, I can tell you're really, really upset right now. Tell me what's going on. And then starting from there and asking them, it just concretely, is this a red thought or is it a green thought? Just keeping it really simple if you're dealing with somebody that has like really intense mood swings. If you try and pull out the thinking trap chart in the middle of a really big freak out or something, it's might be not so productive.
We have some comments coming in. I really like the comments about empathizing with teens first. I often jump right into solution mode. A great question here. When is the follow-up session after we've had a month or two to change a habit or two?
Yeah. Yeah, happy to do it. you know, they take practice, so it's always nice to have a little booster session.
Great, we'll plan
Um,
that. Here, what about fear thoughts? My son was scared by a man in a truck a few weeks ago. He was intentionally trying to scare my son. Now he's scared to walk alone and is afraid of every car that goes past him. How would be the best way to support him?
yeah, so I'm sorry to hear that happen. That sounds like a pretty freaky situation for your son. So that's a situation where we would kind of, you know, think about evidence for, evidence against. So how many cars pass him every day when he walks to school, and how many creepy guys did he have try and scare him? So saying, you know, this is like a 1 in a million kind of chance. And then, you know, using, you know, problem solving. So if that happens again, of course, I'm sure you guys went through kind of what to do. And this is a situation where I might bring out the inner coach. So what can your inner coach say to you that's going to make you feel brave? So even if some guy pops out and tries to scare you, how are you going to feel brave? What can you tell yourself? I'm not sure how young he is, but even having like a little, you know, safety medallion. So when I carry my special coin, yeah, so if I carry something like a special coin or a Pokemon card, I know that this makes me feel brave. If I have it, I'm going to feel brave. So doing things like that.
All right, lots of questions coming in. Oh goodness, where do I start? Hold on, let me just back up a bit here. My daughter gets angry very easily over small things. How could I address this? I tell her feelings are real and try to talk to her, but it's hard. She's only 8 and has been like this since she was 5.
Okay. So yeah, that's a challenging situation when they happen really fast. Um, I don't know if you might have tried this already, but kind of going, you know, is this a small problem or is this a big problem? Um, those kinds of reframing. So it's okay to feel angry, but is our anger sort of, is the intensity, like, is this a 10 out of 10 anger situation, or is this a 5 out of 10 anger situation? And what might 5 out of 10 anger look like? So maybe it's not screaming, maybe it's, you know, I'm going to stomp my feet a bit and then I'm okay. But that does sound like a tricky one when it happens super quickly. Again, so sort of there's a lot of work you can do outside of the actual emotional reaction to kind of prepare your kids. So if you know that anger is a thing, I might name anger and then problem solve when she's calm and have her practice those skills when she's calm so that when anger does pop up, then she's a little bit better prepared. Because if you just try it when she's angry, that's going to be, I mean, pretty tricky probably.
All right, someone is asking, are there any good workbooks for kids to work through anxiety?
There are lots that,
Maybe you could send them to me and I can send them out as additional resources. How about that?
yeah, because I don't know them off the top
Yeah.
of my head.
All right, could you suggest a way to break a negative habitual series of thoughts?
So if they're habitual, again, sort of identifying the thinking trap, um, sometimes for kids where they happen really quickly, or adults too, actually will use this, you know, you just identify that they're happening really fast and then imagine a big stop sign and go, okay, stop. I need to think about what I'm telling myself here, just as a way of kind of breaking up that pattern. And again, it's going to take a lot of practice to identify those negative habitual ways of thinking and then start editing them and doing that slowly.
All right, at what point of listening do you bring out the coach?
Um, you know, I think when they've sort of expressed to you how they feel and you've got the facts of the situation, again, I think some teenagers especially tend to go on a little bit and giving you all the kind of the gory details, but saying, you know, as long as you've acknowledged that they're really upset and said, okay, so you're really upset, and that's because, you know, Tim got mad at you today and you didn't like that. So just sort of, I would say, it's hard to give a time frame if I don't necessarily know, but as long as you've acknowledged the feeling and kind of the situation, then saying, you know, that's probably upsetting. And I'm curious what your inner coach might say to you right now if he was trying to boost your mood right now. Um, So I see one that says, so it's okay to experience the emotion, but try not to get caught up in the thinking trap of automatic thoughts. Is that close? So yeah, so it's okay to have the feeling. And kind of the thinking traps, we think about them as they make us feel even worse. So you know, anxiety, low mood, stress, we're all going to feel that right now, and those thinking traps take that feeling and make it worse. So, you know, make it more anxious. They also don't help you get out of that anxiety. So I hopefully that answers your question. You don't want to be harsh on yourself about having feelings too. That's another kind of thinking trap that people kind of fall into, especially when they start learning this stuff, is saying, oh, I'm feeling anxious right now and this is my thinking trap and why am I doing this all over again? You want to be kind of gentle with yourself.
All right, looks like a final question here. How do you adapt these strategies when worries happen at bedtime or in the middle of the night?
Okay, yeah, so I would have a bedtime coping plan. Okay, so we know, you know, the worry bug is going to visit at bedtime. So what do we need to do to make sure that, I don't know, we get our bug repellent and we make sure that he can't come. So we know that he's going to come and say that there's a monster under my bed. We know evidence for or against. This is the routine that I'm going to go through. So dad's going to check under my bed one time, and then I'm going to put my teddy bear here, and the teddy bear keeps my worry bug away. In the middle of the night too, I would kind of just develop sort of a coping plan and saying, okay, so we know he might show up in the middle of the night. So if your worry bug shows up, what do you need to do? Do you need to break out your bug repellent and spray him away by, you know, telling him to shoo or something really concrete like that? That might make it a little easier to get some restful sleep for everybody.
Right, let's take one more. I feel my son has developed my thinking traps. Can he stop this later? He is 10.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I feel my son has developed my thinking traps.
Ah.
Can he stop this later? He is 10.
Yeah, and so again, that's not going to be uncommon. We learn how to think from our parents. You know, I would have learned it from my own parents. It's just sort of, you know, the nature of things. So I think definitely he can kind of unlearn those. You might want to do your own work to kind of work on your thinking traps, but just identifying them in the moment and saying, you know, that's kind of what we call a thinking trap, or that's something an inner critic might say. So I wouldn't be worried about not being able to undo those. I think, you know, most people at least get some thinking traps from the people that they grow up with. That doesn't mean anything catastrophic. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance.
Thank you very much, Danae, for your expertise and your time. And thank you, everyone. We had record registration for CES for this event. We had 298 people register. 130 of you showed up, which is great. Thank you for that. And we thank you for supporting CES's programming. Again, thank you, Danae, and we look forward to your follow-up sessions maybe in September or October. Take care. Good night.